down to business.
So, as I said, you know, the main part of the conference was colloquium light. This is workshop light. So we're here to do some practical work and to come up with basically strategize and brainstorm to come up with a list of practical things in the next decade. Working kind of like the consensus product of the process National Academy of Sciences does in space sciences. For instance, the decadal survey, which is like one of the unknown great successes of the federal government. It's a process that works brilliantly. So that's what we're going to do. The basic format is going to be, Eric's going to talk for about a half an hour about, well, political facts of life, and I won't characterize your talk any more than that. Then Sam, Les, and I will do a 10-minute response to a formal 10-minute prepared response to Eric's half hour.
We've all swapped each other's presentations in advance, so this
isn't
isn't completely spontaneous. There's no Geraldo here.
And for example, I'm going to get into more of the energy, you know, specific energy numbers that I was talking about. Okay, and then we're gonna tell you about the three BOFs and the three things. BOF is birds of a feather session. The three BOFs. It's a word from the hacker community. Does anybody else use it?
I don't know.
Well, we're hackers.
IEEE does, I
use
think.
it. This conference actually is modeled very much on hackers, which you should like. In fact, that has something to do with Eric's talk. So three BOFs. We'll tell you what the subjects are, and we'll mix it up a little to kind of get going. We're going to have another one of those large boards with push pins, so you can start now in the middle of the day, jotting down ideas on index cards and putting them on the board. And tonight we'll have a more organized method of doing that. And then we'll just mix it up a little, and that'll be the end of our 2 hours. And then we'll see you again tonight at the hotel to get down to work, because this is a workshop. Eric.
So since we are in the South, if you feel moved by the spirit to heckle, please do so. I like a lively conversation rather than a dead one. So my talk is called, at this point, The Next Step, Orbital Industry, National Military. Militaries, plural, because I think this is the single most important thing to get right at the stage you're doing things. Now, the first slide is the why you should be listening to me at all slide, which is not at all obvious because it's not at all about space, it's about cryptography and privacy. 20-odd years ago, I started an activist group called cypherpunks, which some of you have heard of. This is the milieu that WikiLeaks came out of. So there's a very specific thing going on with cypherpunks that I want to tell you, and the bullet points here give you the very much outline of the story. So the Clipper chip in '93, which was April 16, 1993, was announced by the Clinton administration. It was wiretap-enabled cryptography. They wanted to foist this on the industry and cause everyone to use this particular kind of chip and kind of cryptography in fielded systems so that the government would have access to it. Basically, something that they had access to different means, most notably the transition to online services. They wanted to ensure that there was no possible route around with the Clipper chip. I was on the front page of the New York Times with a quote the very next day opposing it. And over the next 4 years, my people and the people we enrolled, as Robert and I have collaborated a lot, so you've heard some of this in his talk, the people that we enrolled made a political coalition that completely squished this idea of wiretap-enabled cryptography. Very much of a pro-privacy, more pro-autonomy even than pro-privacy. Many of you who I know have been to LibertyCon, you may already know the story. We squished it so hard that the last time the federal government tried to put in new anti-cryptography regulations was 1997. In 2001, when the Patriot Act came out, there were no cryptography regulations in the draft. We didn't have to fight it. It was already fought. That's how total the victory was. The lesson here for you all is that I want to teach you how to get the same level of victory with space development. Because you're at risk, and I've seen this for years. I have living in California for so long, hanging out with libertarians. I've seen the risk. I want to teach you how to not do the same thing. Yeah, Robert's got this is one of the artifacts from that area. This t-shirt is not a munition, and it has a bar-coded version.
It is a munition. It's machine-readable encryption.
Can I say not a musician? I am thinking of Magritte. Excuse me.
Oh, funny.
My own personal sarcasm coming out.
You're scaring me to death with tripping on that cord over there.
I am so where it is.
Okay.
So the anti-strategy Argue for security from a position of government skepticism. This was the main risk that the cypherpunks movement had in year one, which was that we were primarily promoted by people with a very heavily libertarian outlook, and they wanted to promote the libertarian outlook along with the privacy agenda. If there's any single contribution I have to this movement, it's to squash that tendency and to tell people and berate people and to get people involved that we had to go in from multiple ways. One of the main people we enrolled were Wall Street security people doing security for Wall Street firms, and basically telling them that their private banking businesses would be at risk if their communications with their clients were subject to government monitoring without cause. There were other factions that we enrolled. One of my favorite ones was a guy from Texas. I got to do a Christian exegesis on the value of privacy using the New Testament, which was really kind of awesome. And that has it about too many doctrinaire libertarians. I am not unsympathetic to libertarianism. Let's just be really clear. I don't think it goes as far as it needs to, but in particular, it's the doctrinaire part which is the problem, right? We'll get to this in a moment. So, let's set the stage. And Robert assures me that this first bullet points are not particularly controversial, that space is in decline. I put some notable missions up there, but the overall investment in space as a whole has been declining as a percentage of what it might have been. Right? If you're going to get to Interstellar, you need to, at the very least, reverse the sign of that derivative. Yeah. So, other people have mentioned this. I'm not going to belabor the point. Let's focus on the last three ones. In order to get cooperation amongst lots of people, you need to develop a common interest, even if you don't think you have one at the beginning. What it means in this case, let's focus on what Kelvin's point is, was the Daedalus thing, harvesting helium-3 from the environment of Jupiter, requires a kind of space industry to do that, which is completely inconceivable of mounting today. So, and Robert made this point as well, that the level of industry needed to mount these kinds of missions is the point at which you can develop common interests. The next bullet point, who are the allies? Robert and I have been collaborating. He started enumerating allies with the Dyson Dot project. There are other allies to be done. Whenever you think about a project, you need to be strategic about this and enumerate the allies and enumerate why they want to do it, and then go find them and ask them if they were willing to go along with your reasons. You can actually be pretty good about empathizing with other people's incentives, learning how to develop them, and give them their position on the subject. And this is not because you are trying to foist a new idea on them. It's having respect for what people believe, understanding it, and having thought through about your own work, what they're likely to think, and then have the conversation with them. You can lead people to their own conclusions much more than you think if you are not trying to convince them of your position. It's an important point. So this is very, very practical sort of empathetic emotional work, something scientists do not naturally gravitate toward, which is one of the reasons I wanted to get up here and talk. And the third point is really where the really matters is you have to convince people to spend a lot of money. And so here is an idea about what a lot means. We have two props. Robert and Ken are going to unroll the first one. The second one, while I talk about the first one, this poster here is an integrated space plan by a Rockwell engineer. He was drafted from 79 to 89. There's several reasons for that. This is this guy's idea about what it takes to do exploration. It includes boxes on the bottom like beginning of operation of Mars colony. Right? And so this is essentially a technological dependency diagram. It's also kind of got that opium fever dream flavor. I don't mean that really insultingly. There is just this, what's correct about this thing is not so much the individual boxes or the arrows connecting them, but the number of boxes. We're talking about something really, really complicated, and we shouldn't minimize the kind of scale. When Robert was in Utah visiting me over the summer, we went to the Bingham Canyon mine. Okay? Prop, please. The Bingham Canyon mine is the largest open pit copper mine in the world.
Okay, you can stop.
The flotation process for the extraction of copper particles from ore was developed for this mine about a century ago. This is Robert's panoramic picture of the mine. This thing here is a 2-story tall haul truck that has a 1 million pound cargo capacity.
It's the size of an apartment building.
This dot here is another one of those haul trucks 4 miles away on the other side of the pit.
government can never do that, only industry could.
Well, we'll talk about that, because we're going to, what's absolutely clear to me is that there has to be some kind of joint operation of government and industry and military to make this happen. But this is so this haul truck is about 10 to the negative 6.5, the volume of the pit. The pit itself is about negative 10 to the 8, the volume of one series.
And this pit only provides 1/5 of the United States copper. So you need 5 pits like this just for America, which means you need 25 pits like this for the world.
So we're talking, Helmut was up here talking about Trevor. Robert was up here proposing a rather ambitious project for the Dyson Dot. I'm going to propose something that's between 5 and 10% of the size of Robert, and it's 1% of the world economy. So we are being mighty arrogant and ambitious here. I think we're done with this for the time being. We're being mighty arrogant and ambitious here, and I want us to understand the scale and be sophisticated enough to pull it off. Right? So this is, at root, an inspirational talk. Okay, here are the ways that you can get allies, right? Allies have common interests, and you have to name and identify the common interests. The word transcendental goods is a word from Charles Murray, who has it in a book called Human Achievement, which is a great book. But he coined this term, I think, for the book, which are transcendental goods include things like religious beliefs, but are not limited to them. So things that feel like religion all go in the class of transcendental goods. Exploration and colonization are the two kind of ordinary transcendental goods that this crowd and its extended crowd have tended to pitch in terms of the reason to do spacecraft, right? I don't think they haven't worked to date, and I don't think you should try to continue to do them in the future as a sole strategy. Material goods are where it's at. Part of Leslie's response is going to talk more about satellites, but satellites demonstrate that space and industry can coexist very nicely with lots of money, lots of material support. That's been a huge success story, and it's something to emulate. Industry is really barely explored. That's I think, where, we've already talked about large industry, and we've already hinted at it, but this is where the action is. Now, having said that, if someone else has another bullet point that would work for that, let's hear it now. Because we want to embark on a planning process to develop a story to tell the world about why they should spend 1% of the world's economy within 50 years on the stuff we love.
What about planetary defense?
Planetary defense actually comes in as planetary defense is part of this, as it turns out, but it goes in, it's just not on that list. Right? Asteroid mining requires being able to identify the things, and so it actually has a lower threshold you need in order to make it work.
I was going to say mine.
Yeah,
In the back.
How about putting your genes into future generations?
that might work, but I suspect that the viability of it isn't deeply percolated enough to make work. I mean, so these are the kinds of things you have to have, because basically every kind of tangential good that has salience to space needs a voice promoting. None of these things ever work on a single voice. They are all a chorus of voices, all with their own viewpoints, all pointing in very roughly the same direction, but with a net average pointing at the goal.
So one of the things that happened with the Voyager focus course was Carl Sagan made them turn around and look back at the Earth. And some people say that was one of the catalysts for the Green Movement. That's debatable. What I've noticed in recent years, probably since the first Nuclear Starship Conference, is one of the justifications for Interstellar flight now, which I hadn't seen on before that, is we go to visit Earth 2 so we can look after Earth 1. So we're going to study Venus, we're going to study Mars, but we're going to develop the technologies which we can use to solve all the problems here as well. And that's not really on this list, but it is a positive gain.
I will agree we should add that as a way of pointing out. That doesn't require so much planning, right? I mean, more than anything else, this picture and that chart illustrate, and the need to do industry as at least a central component, if not the sole component, means that we have a planning problem, a strategy problem.
What about limits to growth?
Let's not get into that right now. We need to go on for this half hour.
About the commercial development of space will provide the economic prosperity to solve a lot of those problems.
That's actually the overall point we want to pitch, regardless of the need. So we're getting lots of good suggestions. We have file cards that we'll have out. I want people just to remember them and write these ideas and pin them to the board after the session. We'll work on it in the bottom. All right. Okay. So So this slide we mostly talked through already. The real important thing I want to mention is at the bottom, which is that we need to rally around an apex project. And this is the communications point. There needs to be a name for the thing you're trying to do. Because it's going to get, because this is only one small part of people's lives on average in the globe. If there's not a name that references a single thing, a single idea, a single goal, it doesn't matter so much what the goal can change a little bit, the means can change a little bit, the technology you need to develop can change. But you need an apex project that's at least nominal and fixed to rally around.
A buzzword.
It will turn into a buzzword. So there's my buzzword, 1 orbital terawatt, right? Robert's array with the Dyson dot is 10 terawatts. In order to build 10 terawatts, you have to build at least some terawatts in space. So this whole genesis of this came from me thinking about, well, how would we build a Dyson dot? It turns out you need to build more or less roughly this. Pitching a Dyson dot is a little too ambitious. That would be on the order of 10% of the world economy. Probably too much to ask for on round 1. People will argue that pitching 1% of the world economy on round 1 is already too much. Done.
So a cylinder company, what fraction of the world economy was that?
Stop. Stop that right now.
So, the question I have, we'll talk about it later, but it sounds really subtle, but is that a mission or a vision statement? One of that control? Because it's a really important distinction between the two. In terms of
Okay. So the question is between vision and mission statement. At this level of granularity for this talk, I'm not going to distinguish between those, because we need to determine what the realistic engineering goal is, right? But in terms of a goal, I think you could, with an aggressive Apollo-like commitment by the world's countries, you could get 1 orbital terawatt by 2050 of delivered power to the grid as it appears at the micro-Daniel location.
But in the Interstellar context, that would be a mission statement, rather than a mission statement, because it's what we're trying to get to.
We'll refine these things all over time, right? I don't want to get too much down. So the mass estimate that Robert has there, I've taken from Robert's work.
Yeah, that's correct.
And the estimates on the number of asteroids I left off. All right. Now, the important thing here, which we'll get to in a moment, is that this is a 40-meter diameter target. Our detection limit, just prefacing, our detection limit is around 300 meters right now. We need a whole new class of astronomy just to go find these things. There are, at the 40-meter diameter, if I remember the number, there's somewhere between tens and hundreds of millions of objects in the Earth orbit. There's plenty of mass to go find. You just got to go find it and find a way of retrieving it. Thousands of retrieval missions alone. That's just another speaking to scale. You had shuttle missions that went on decades that never got very far into the 3 figures. We're talking about increasing just the number of lift missions to do stuff, to lift orbital retrieval vehicles to bring the asteroids back, going up an order of magnitude at minimum. Right? So we have ambitious goals here, and I want to try to reify what the ambitious goals really come down to when you talk about activity. Right? I mean, in some sense, I also want to make the crowd more sober about what needs to happen. Okay, 40 meters was chosen because that's the estimated size of the asteroid that caused the Tunguska event about 100 years ago. Right? A 40-meter asteroid that's able to be manipulated by humans is the equivalent of a nuclear bomb. And an asteroid mining operation is the equivalent of a nuclear arsenal. So we have immediately a problem here, because the fantasy dream of pure private property rights, doing anything you want, wherever you want, however you want, with the mass that you own, is a military threat to the people who do not like you and who you do not like. This won't be tolerated. I mean, for as nice a story and as motivational story as Heinlein's The Moose and His Heart Schmitz's has been, there's no way that the world's militaries are that stupid to let this get developed and be completely autonomous of their input. They have a stake. The world's militaries have a stake in your asteroid mining operation. Whether you like it or not, whether you think they ought to or not, de facto, they will care.
Emphasis on stake in your ass.
Well, Chinese have been developing anti-satellite capacity, and my guess is that if there were a completely, not exactly rogue, but completely autonomous private guy that wanted to go do asteroid mining, that's a great live fire test, because it's not casus belli against a national interest, just some economic interest. Right? Live fire targets don't come free. But Private enterprise can provide. Okay, let's segue into the real meat of the talk, the real kind of like hard philosophical core. These questions about what to do about this connection, this technical connection that generates a military issue, these are political questions. They have technical implications, but they are essentially political questions. Not just tangentially military, this is at the essence of what the question is. Now, this is the only thing where I'm going to be at all particularly academic here. But the notion of the expert goes back to ancient Greece and the argument that Socrates had with Athenian democracy. He made the argument, which goes like this in the Timaeus dialogue, and I'm paraphrasing Bruno Latour here, who is the most glorious writer about science you will ever read. You can quote me. He said, in the fight of might versus right, Callicles is the other one in the dialogue. Callicles says that the people will respond to might. And Socrates says, no, we can seize power by making them defer their democratic power to us people who are philosophical experts, because we know more than they do, and they should shut up. I'm summarizing a very sophisticated essay in stupid words and through sentences. But the basic point is that expertise is a form of political power, and it was designed as such from the beginning of our civilization's history. Right? So to the extent that we have knowledge and talent, we should not turn it into raw expertism and try to seize political power to accomplish a political agenda along with the technical one. That's the mistake that was developed with the risk of cypherpunks, and that's the mistake that is possible to make here unless you listen to me. I can pitch my talk just as well as Kelvin can pitch his book. Okay. Here is the cautionary tale, which is the global warming. This is a very rough history in bullet points of what happened. Starting in the 60s and 70s, people started getting the first kind of real implication that there was a global warming phenomenon that was caused by carbon. And they got a little panicked because the error bars were even larger then than they were now, but they knew that something really awful could happen. And their failure of imagination is that the only way they could think of solving it were things they hated, right? Which is to say, nuclear, which they hated, or other things. So they invented a political program, and the name of the political program I called carbon abstinence, right? And if they had ever bothered to name their own political program separately, having observed it was an abstinence program, I think they might have thought twice, because abstinence has worked so well every other place it's been tried in human history. It won't work, it didn't work for alcohol, and it won't work for carbon, right? So let's not do that, right? So the error they made is this phrase commingled whole, right? They didn't actually present a distinction between the agenda and the science. And this is present in the IPCC papers, particularly Working Group 3, which is the one about mitigation techniques. I went and read that in preparation for this work. The section on geoengineering is 3 sentences long entirely, and it says it won't work and it's too expensive and they don't know what they're doing. Those are roughly speaking of the examples.
Yeah.
So let's go. You all know what US politics are like. I just put that so you can read it. Here's your hazard. Do not do that. Do not commingle your politics. You know, your de facto desire to do this whole thing with free market enterprise, along with orbital industry. You have a values choice here. Values are expressed in lived preferences. What you do expresses your values much more than what you say. The preference you have here is that if you have to give one up, would you rather give up orbital industry and have a different political structure, or would you rather have a free market enterprise and give up orbital industry? Because that's pretty much the factual choice you're based on. My guess is that the people here would rather give up the political arrangement that they are comfortable with and go with orbital industry, which is a long-term human goal. I want to be real clear about that. I'm confronting your belief system in a very core way and counterposing it against the belief system, which is, I think, even more core to you. It's a hard choice. I'm not going to deny that. It will generate lots of discussion, like I hope.
You can be wrong, we don't care.
So in terms of fighting a war, this isn't really a war, but it's a grand project, you need a strategy. You need to kind of know like what you're up to and how you're doing it. So these are the first steps in the strategy. The first one is you have to advocate a program. And in our case, it means we need to design a program before we can advocate it. 1% of the world economy needs a plan, at least a plausible plan, even if it has huge gaps about what we know how to do now. So that's the first step. The second thing is to get people involved, and that means go out and find them yourself, not wait for them to come to you. This is pretty easy because we know who all the major stakeholders are. We can just get them on the phone. Now, we're fairly well connected here, not as well connected as we will be in a decade. Cross your fingers. But it's easy to call people, particularly if we've got something substantive to say, and I don't think we have anything that's not non-substantive here. Induce the political process. Now, this is a little more difficult because we're talking about needing to tie into existing political institutions and organizations like the UN and world governments and all that. So part of the people we have to enroll early are people who know how to actually do the real politics of the political process. I mean, we can call them, we have to figure out who they are and develop a strategy on who we want and feel people out before we formally invite them. But we have to create the political process. Within 5 years, I want to have a working group meeting of major US militaries, major industrialists, other governmental interests, the scientific community, to actually get something going. That should be a goal we should be doing here within 5 years. And then we have to fund the missions, right? All this means we have to actually just start doing stuff as well. Some of that stuff can be tracked in parallel depending on how much traction you get before the larger goal. But you have to actually start doing stuff, because if you're not doing stuff and just talking, you're just talking. Okay. Roles of scientists and engineers. Now, the last point is probably the most important, but you have to understand the first ones in order to get to it. Exemplifying the distinction between the technical and the political. I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to say when I'm making a technical plan and when I'm making a political position. This slide does not say that scientists should be silent about politics. That is a huge mistake. It says that when you are, as a scientist, advocating a political position, that you state that you're advocating a political position, and state your understanding of why it's a political position, and where the line between the technology and the politics is, because you are the domain expert in the edge of science. Right? If you are untruthful, violating point 1, you will fail, because there are plenty of scientists, and they will call you out. And if you develop the right dynamics, you end up with a good, solid basis of people who are technically able to talk about things and have an agenda and are able to advocate for it. So in this case, so to go represent a previous point, we do not want people to give up their free market ideals just because that's not going to be the overall top-level structure. There's plenty of room for free enterprise on this. For Hayek, that all comes from Hayek's calculation problem, which he wrote about the Soviet Union. You cannot run a global power system with single control. The calculation problem is too large. At the bottom there will be private enterprise. It probably won't exist at the highest level. Where the dividing line is, I don't know. It's a political decision that I'm not going to decide for you or for anybody else. Let's talk about a really easy to identify question of politics. Who participates? Right? I put up national interests here because that's easy, with a kind of nod to international corporations, because I don't think it's realistic that they drive the thing. So there's 3 polities I've identified: sole superpower, aka dictatorship, an oligarchy, or the let's all hug model of the United Nations. These are cartoons, obviously. The point being is that you can think through what each of those groups of countries would do with a project like this if that's who was doing it. And you get a different feel for what kinds of things would happen and how it would be made to happen and what the eventual scale of the thing is. If I were giving this talk 20 years ago, there would be the duopoly of the US and USSR up on there as one of the possible people that could do it.
Cornell's codominium.
There's actually science fiction people, many of you are, endless numbers of discussions about what possible organizations are. This is something that you are not incapable of thinking about. You people have some experience in thinking about this kind of issue. Do not be silent. Right? My position is that you need a federation, a unitary organization, meaning a single buyer, single seller, single controller of various technical things, and open-ended membership that you can eventually enroll the entire world. Won't be able to start with the entire world for many things. My opinion. I have got lots of justification reasons. This is a half-hour introductory talk. We won't go into it. Okay. Principles if you're running a federation, or many other things that require cooperation. These are these are political statements, but they have technical consequences. And they're in fact driven in certain ways by technical necessity, right? Transparent operation means that everything that's happening is visible by everybody in the world. I mean, actually transparent operation. If, I will just make an assertion off to the side, if the nuclear industry had not grown up in the shadow of the Cold War and had taken transparent operation as a vital principle from the 50s, we wouldn't need to have this discussion, we would have already gone nuclear. Joint control has a lot to do with cryptographic elements and things that are like permissive action links, and there's a lot of deep technology for being able to do joint planning of a trajectory, and then joint execution of the thing, where you have multiple command and control things that all simultaneously hit a single orbital asset and cause it to act in a coherent way. But I think you need that because you have essentially mutual hostile military action available otherwise. And then mutual decision making has a lot to do with how you structure the politics. I am on track, almost done. Okay, here is, in fact, yes, that's the last slide. So here's an example, just to give you another feel of what this realm looks like, of a way in which your political choices do affect your technical choices. So we're talking about putting orbital, this project is orbital photovoltaic somewhere between medium and high Earth orbit, sunward pointing on all the time, providing base load power to humanity. Because you have a military issue, you need geographic security of the downlink sites, which means the Chinese tower needs to end up in Chinese territory, not go through India, right? So you have a large part of how you design your constellation, how you design the visibility, whether or not you need uplink. This all has to do with who's participating, and how things are working. And these choices are really fundamental. They need to be done early, which is one of the reasons that it induces an immediate political question. You can't really finalize on the design of a constellation until you know who's participating and how the overall flows and structures are going to work. You can do scenario planning, design multiple constellations for the people to understand enough to know what the ramifications are and come to a mutual decision. So there's lots of work just in constellation design at the very beginning that you have to be politically aware of. This last thing here, comedy trumps efficiency. Comedy is getting along together. Efficiency is being as ruthless as possible with material efficiency of things. Efficiency is a totalitarian principle. It is not a democratic principle. Whenever you hear someone touting efficiency, there's a political agenda behind it where they're telling someone to be silent. So perfect technical efficiency is something to be sought, but not as the highest good, right? Just needing to have power downlink being secure is going to give you a less than fully efficient system. I mean, that's I think, a pretty easy thing to claim without knowing a lot of detail. So anyway, you're going to need something like a democratic process between large national peers in order to make this work. So remember that last principle. So what we want to do for the boss today is to start with this proposal. It's a very much a trial-blown proposal, and see how much we can understand about what it takes to do that, right? We've got pin boards and file cards, so we can kind of mimic this map. And I want people, when they have an idea, to just write the idea on a card and pin it to the board. Other people will move your idea to a different part of the board later. We're trying to create a kind of group idea about what all this means to do it. So now we'll do the responses. I have asked the respondents here to speak from their own personal point of view, just as I've advocated that as we have diversity of opinion about how to get things done, we want diversity of their particular views on this.
Lots of ideas on Eric Hughes' presentation. When it came to going into space, to the moon and to other places, it wasn't a matter of if, it was who and when. Tales of traveled extraterrestrial bodies were part of the reading public's mentality for centuries, from Cyril to Bergerac, through Vernon Wells, Nolan and Raymond, Hyman and Lang. The science involved was grew into large populations. Everybody knows what a firework is. Everyone knows how a rocket works. A V2 is merely a more advanced model. There was no need for a backstory. Someone on the street could understand what we're doing, what was done. Orbiting satellites and lunar landings were going to happen. It was just when and how. Now, with the impetus of war, the Raumschiff,
Ferrying for Raumschifffahrt.
Yes. Yes, in other words, the Joint Rocketry Club
The
is
reason
how
we
you.
call it VFR.
VFR as easily. Yes. Drew inspiration from Goddard and became the basis of later improvements. You had a private group experimenting, which was then taken into a governmental entity and propelled by wartime stresses. And then the Cold War came along, and in that testosterone measuring match between us and the Soviet Union, for lack of a better term, it propelled both sides to continue along this line of development. And we had faces, we had heroes, we had names that everyone knew: Sputnik, Gagarin, Shepard, Glenn, Yeager, to name a few. After spectacular successes, Cold War ground to its inevitable halt, and other matters clamored for public attention. The peace dividends, which never materialized, for example. Now, we have problems recapturing the fireworks, due partly to a lack of proper logic and science education, which I have to face constantly. Scientific fact is now considered debatable and can be shouted down by someone who has no empirical understanding of the situation. We need to start calling out some of these techno-Luddites by name and not backing down. I know I'm sounding a little fierce there, but it's a topic I've been a little touchy on. There have been too many Chicken Little events competing with political doctrine, causing the public to discount all involved. We have no real heroes at the present time, no faces that can expose people around the populace. We need believers in both parties in the United States and should approach all power level actors abroad. Everyone here is a believer. We need to get the message out with a missionary zeal and real rewards. Part of the problem is overselling the future and not delivering. The promised world of tomorrow and conquest of space has not, in the public line, been fulfilled. We were promising wheels in the sky. Well, that looks like a coffee can convention. People want Star Trek, not excuses. The public must be educated on the new ideas of propulsion. Rockets are commonly used and understood. Antimatter, Orion drives, ion drives, light sails. Alcubierre? What's the proper pronunciation?
Alcubierre.
Alcubierre, thank you. Drives, these need explaining and selling, especially the Orion concept. That one's going to cause people to break out in a rash. Let's keep the public up to date on the discovery of new worlds. If they know it's there, we can fan that hunger. Our weather satellite system is degrading due to the lack of funding. Hurricane Sandy alone showed the value added to this program. Tying dealing with anti-terrorism and rogue nation threats could be played upon with Dyson Dott's idea of reduced cost of energy to play it up. This lower power bill brought to you by your friends in space. Never thought I'd say it, but sponsor NASCAR competitors. Another high visibility, high exposure positive venues. How about a Lamborghini Aventador powered by solar power? That comes down from space. So to capture the public imagination. Allow buy-in from the public by encouraging outside proposals, technologies, and methods that might be useful, making a non-restrictive input environment as long as it works. Drawings and lotteries. Be the first on your block to have an extra solar planet's mountain range named after your children. We need a golden spike moment with bands, with attention, an event publicized and heralded, a symbol for opening of the West. Everyone knows about the golden spike and the significance. We need something like that to recapture the public's imagination. People love winners. Let's give them those victories. And
Thank
you. I think we need to get a little bit Music Man about some of this. Really very positive, but we also need to be aware that we can draw on several different sources, everything from multinational treaty organizations on down to private subscriptions, something along the lines of the Black Star Line that Marcus Garvey tried to do. It was a failed social experiment, and it was a failure all the way across the board, but you could sell stock. You could sell a dream. People were buying part of the dream. Let the public in on that. I think that is a good point to stop for right now.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
So really, really great, Sam, as usual. But I didn't get from that what your actual response was to the proposals on the table.
No, that was his response. His response was we need to pay attention to the PR, motivational and emotional aspects of the public listening.
But it was very general, that we need to do something, but it wasn't specific from the actual
Well,
proposal in general.
that, the question in the back.
We gave you 10 minutes.
Well, I think part of what we're going to be doing is pretty high level. I think tonight is when we're going to try to get to the nuts and bolts responses. Calling our thing a response is maybe not a correct nomenclature. It's more thoughts on the
My question
topic.
very quickly is, is what you're proposing consistent with what you're saying?
Yes, in my opinion.
Does Sam believe that? That's what I'm saying.
Do you believe
Is
that?
it consistent with?
I believe it's consistent
Okay,
with
so that's
it.
the answer.
I think that it's a necessary brick in the structure.
That's a good way of putting it.
We've got to get the public re-involved.
Good question in the back.
Well, not just a question, it's a comment. This is an internet age. What we need to do is sell content. If we have something that people want to, I mean, when you join a club, you go to meetings. We're not going to get 1 million people going to meetings. But we want 1 million people paying dollars for the service that we're rendering, whatever that might, the best we can generate content. Some people write books. We need content.
So, Robert, let me interject this one. We want to leave the box to be relatively open-ended, but we decided we needed to kind of seed what the topics would be about. So, the 3 topics are going to be done by Robert and Sam and I. Robert's going to focus on the 5 to 10 year immediate action kind of things, the things you can, like, you have to do anyway. Let's figure out what you can get done now. I'm going to work on the kind of 50-year time horizon plan, kind of more focused on that block diagram, and Sam's going to focus on everything you just talked about.
Okay.
Basically, yes.
Yeah.
We're in good shape. All right. Now, this has been alluded to 3 times already by 3 different people, but anything in space is potential WMD. I'll get to exactly how that, but interstellar travel, like I said, big energy, big mass, big money. And all these things taken together mean big power, both the physical and the political. Energy is the biggest industry on planet Earth today. In fact, the oil sector alone is the biggest single industry on planet Earth today. It is 10 cents on every dollar that every man, woman, and child makes in the world today. It's about $5 trillion a year, depending on the price of crude. Electricity is a $1 trillion worldwide industry. So, when he talks about being ambitious and capturing 10% of the world's economy, that's a drop in the oil bucket, right? If you thought the car industry was the big industry, no, it's the same size as electricity. Petroleum's semi-order of magnitude bigger than that. The United States now has 1 trillion watts nameplate electrical capacity. If you ever wondered how wired this country is, that's how wired it is. The entire world is about 4 times as much. It's about 4 terawatts. Remember that Dyson Dot is 10 terawatts. He's talking about 1 terawatt in orbit. So basically, 1 American grid in space by the year 2050. When you think that the United States, or actually any country with a grid, must replace their grid every 40 years because stuff wears out, that's not just such a crazy thing. We're going to have to build 1 trillion watts in the next 40 years anyway. Why not put it in space? Anybody who thinks, oh, well, solar power, it's not very strong. The amount of energy that falls on the sunlit face of Earth in 1 hour is equal to what the entire human race uses for everything. Electricity, motor fuel, burning camel poop in the middle of the desert for a campfire, everything. 1 hour of sunlight is equal to what the human race uses in 1 year. That's an energy fact of life. At current growth rates, if they continue, the world will be using about 3 times that much by the year 2050. And the electricity portion alone will be 8 terawatts. That'll be the demand if it continues as currently projected. That is why one of the reasons the solar patch on the Dyson dot is the size it is. Okay, now you've already seen the Bingham Canyon mine, so I'm not going to waste any more time on that. By the way, 20 billion tons of rock has been removed from that canyon in its 20-year lifetime. And we would need 25 such mines to provide the world with the copper it's using now. And that dump truck is the same size as the 40-meter Tunguska asteroid that Eric alluded to, and Stephen Covey, Deep Space Industries, 40. That's the stuff you guys are talking about now is the dump truck. Mm-hmm. You need to be talking about the whole. I'm not talking about it, but that needs to be in your brain because that's the real scale. Okay? So this thing is huge. It's 300 million tons. It actually compares quite favorably with nuclear power on a watts per kilogram basis. Big money. Okay. The takeaway from here, you hear politicians go, oh, we need a Manhattan Project for energy, or we need an Apollo program for energy. Hell, an Apollo program is a drop in the bucket compared to what's required. Apollo is a drop in the bucket compared to the oil industry by itself today.
A drop in the barrel for the oil.
A drop in the barrel. So when politicos say we need an Apollo program, that means they don't even understand the scale of the problem. We can help with that. Okay? I think building the first Dyson dots is going to cost low trillions of dollars, which is about 10% of what the world makes in 1 year. Okay? A shell world, well, let's not even talk about shell world. That's a really big idea. There's my co-author. That'll be quadrillions of dollars, right? Which I think, that rough order of magnitude, that's what the first trip to Alpha Centauri is going to cost thousands of trillions of dollars. And that's going to be in a ship that weighs millions of tons and goes about, at most, 3% C, right? Now,
you're looking at Kelvin and asking him, right? He's not going to agree with you.
Well, he's shaking his head. Now, later on, as technological and energy production increases, later on, we'll be able to go faster, and maybe 100 years after that, we'll be, for the same amount of money, we'll be able to go a lot faster in a smaller ship. But the note about all of these things is, this is a liter of water, which is to say it's 1,000 milliliters of water, which is to say it's 1 kilogram, okay? This kilogram in low Earth orbit, if it were dropped, is 10 times its weight in TNT, potential energy. So right there, this object, right off the bat, is certainly, what's the BATF funny word for a bomb?
Device.
Destructive device. Okay?
Defense destruction.
If this were on the first generation Starship going 3% of C, this kilogram at 3% of C is 10 kilotons of energy, which is Hiroshima. This kilogram is Hiroshima. At 0.9 C, this kilogram is Castle Bravo, if anybody knows the first
15 megatons.
10. Castle Bravo. You're talking about Castle Mike. You know what? You're right. Castle Bravo is 15 megatons.
Was the runaway?
I made a mistake. It was the runaway. Operation Mike was the United States' first thermonuclear test, 10 megatons, erased the Lugalab Island in the Pacific. So this is Mike, is the Mike device, right? More things to put it in perspective. If you accelerated the entire Saturn V stack to 3% of light speed and back, that's half of all the energy that mankind uses in 1 year. If you accelerated the tiny little command module at the top, just the little cone thing, to 0.9 C and back, that is equal to all the energy mankind uses in a year. So, interstellar travel, big energy, big mass, big money. We ain't gonna get there overnight. So if you wanna go to Alpha Centauri, well, maybe you won't go yourself, but if that's something you want to happen, you should direct your career to making everybody rich. And my proposition is space-based geoengineering is on the roadmap to get you there, that desirable end state. Picture again. So let's get going. Liz?
I have to give the caveat at the beginning of my talk that I do work for NASA, but I'm here on vacation this week. This is not a NASA conference, so the opinions I give are strictly my own, and now that I've gotten that out of the way, I do have to let you know that I do live within the beast, as some would say. I work for NASA, and these are strictly my own opinions coming from within NASA, and when I talk about the beast, I don't mean that just in a negative sense that some might take that. I mean, it's a big organization. There's a lot of complexity, there's a lot going on. And I think within NASA, at least within Marshall, I have a little bit of a reputation being in the Advanced Concepts office of being kind of out there. But compared to the task at hand, I'm an absolute Luddite. And the reason for that is because I'm having to implement advanced concept systems where we're looking 10 to 25 years in the future. And the stuff we're talking about here, we're going to be taking our baby steps in the next 10 to 25 years to get there. And I want to set the context for where I view we are today with regard to getting where we want to be. In my opinion, we've won a part of what we set out to do at the beginning of the space age. And that is that in robotic science and exploration, we have rewritten the textbooks several times on what the solar system in which we live is like and where we are in our neighborhood. If I were to go back to when I was in school 30 years ago and get out my old astronomy book, let alone the physics book, it's totally outdated. We've rewritten it. We have probes all over the solar system. We are learning a tremendous amount about the neighborhood. But I would contend that we've also won in an area that most people don't even think we've won. And I don't mean NASA, I mean we've won. I mean we space advocates. And that is, if you look at the economics of satellites today, our economy, in my opinion, is dependent upon them. We use them for everything. We use them for communications. Your cell phone is a cell tower, but guess what? Your cell phone relies on precise timing in order to route the data across the globe to the different cell towers. How do they do that? GPS. GPS will soon be navigating our aircraft. It navigates our cars. It navigates our ships, our fishing fleets. Our farmers use it. Financial resource management. VSAT terminals are on top of banks. They're on top of Walmart stores. Satellite link is now used instead of the internet for secure credit card transactions. It's used by the big banks at the end of the day to transfer billions of dollars across the globe. Okay? It is an instrument of financial and economic policy. Manufacturing. Just-in-time manufacturing, which has allowed companies to remain profitable in this global economy. Supply and demand is constantly shifting. They know where the parts are to make their widgets because they're in transit on trucks that are being tracked by GPS, where the truckers are in communication, letting the dispatchers know where they are and what they're doing by phone. There are chips embedded in all these things that keep track of what goes in and out of the factory. Reorders happen from department stores by VSAT between wholesalers, distributors. All of it is networked by satellite. Weather and communications, those are the ones that go back the longest. We are absolutely dependent on them. And military. We were talking Saturday night about the Milstar constellation. Not to get into the nuances of this, but our military uses commercial communications to communicate with people in the field. The satellite commanders, the tactical situation, precision-guided munitions, all of this depends on satellite technology. So my contention is that in the area of robotics, and I'm not saying we don't want to be doing human, I'm just talking about this one area, our economy, and I would contend the global economy, is now addicted to satellites. We've won. We've done it. We've achieved this. The battle is not over, but it's something that the average person on the street doesn't appreciate. Therein lies the problem. When you take this information out and you talk to people on the street, they may or may not know that we have people in space, and we have had them in space continuously for 10 years. They may or may not know that there are private space companies that are going out to maybe mine the asteroids and take tourists into space. But I guarantee you, they're totally illiterate about how their jobs and how when they buy gasoline at the local Texaco, it depends on satellite technology. They don't know it. They probably don't care, right? And in one sense, that's a success because it's become an invisible part of the infrastructure. But on the other hand, it's, oh my gosh, they don't realize how important this is and how we have to continue to develop it to maintain this prosperous future that we envision. In the United States, and I'm speaking American-centric right now, when you get into the political arena, it just doesn't come up. Social and economic concerns are what dominated our recent political campaign. We had a presidential candidate get laughed out of the room when he brought up the possibility of a lunar base. 25 to 30 years ago, that would not have been laughed out of the room. The era of big projects and the notion of doing grand things, not necessarily just sponsored by government, but on any scale, seems to be in our rearview mirror. It's a short-sightedness that we have to be aware of that's gotten into our culture. And so along with all this tremendous success, we've gotten complacent. And I would contend that's not a uniquely American problem. But it seems that people don't believe we're capable of doing the grand vision anymore. That's all behind us. All we have to look forward to now are more incremental things so we can preserve the social safety net, okay? And that is the perception that's out there, real or not. It's a perception. But wait, people are concerned about some things. They're concerned about the environment. We've talked about that. They're concerned about energy. And when the true relative cost of what space costs in terms of what we do as a nation, people get supportive. When I go out and give talks to general audiences, they're stunned to learn that the investment that the average American makes in the space program is roughly comparable to their potato chip budget, okay? And it is comparable to 1/3 of what we spend globally on soda, okay? That's how much we put into space and space development. It is an overestimated expenditure on the part of the public and an underappreciated in terms of the returns that it's brought back to us. Now, speaking for NASA, our cachet, as I'm still coasting on the glory years of Apollo, is still very high. People have this brand name identification with the NASA meatball that's very positive. And I think that we should not forget that there are things we can do with that to further the development of space, and we shouldn't be embarrassed by that, but we've got to do it in a right way and to not tarnish that cachet. So my opinion is we've got to make space development, what I would say, talking about the soda and the potato chips, and hopefully a lot healthier than either of those, we've got to make space tasty. We've got to make it appealing to people, and hence make it relevant to people. And so my response to what we're talking about here is if we're talking about the development of space, we don't want to just talk about spin-offs. We don't want to talk about the grand vision. We want to talk about how it's going to impact our children and our children's children and how we can make improvements today in the things people are concerned about today. And that by doing that, we will enable the grand vision of tomorrow. How do we do this? I think there are all kinds of discussions we can have about that. I think governments need to minimize the barriers to commercial space development, and that's not just by getting out of the way. That could potentially be through tax incentives, rules, regulations, how the Department of Commerce does things, FAA, as well as NASA. The public will have to accept failures and potentially spectacular failures as long as we make the case that we've learned from our mistake and we've done everything we can to avoid those failures. The space goals have got to be relevant. And I keep coming back to that. We've got to be relevant. This is the day of relevance for how people want to view investments and how it's going to return things to them. And we've got to make space affordable so that it is as commonplace as going to the beach. And I think that the one leverage, and I'll be quiet and sit down and we can have the discussion, that's encouraging to me is commercial space. I give this example all the time when I talk about why it costs so much to launch Robert's water bottle into space at $10,000 to $20,000 a kilogram, is because we only have a few flights per year. If you look at the design, development, test, and engineering that goes into the new Corvette that's rolling off the assembly line in Bowling Green, Kentucky, GM poured billions, with a B, into the design, development, test, and engineering of that new Corvette. If they sold 3 Corvettes a year, how much would those Corvettes cost? Right? Okay? The single biggest leverage, more than any technology that we've seen in any studies that we've done within NASA, the single biggest leverage to bringing down costs dramatically is flight rate. You launch more, the cost per flight goes down. Enabling the vision that we all have here is going to require lots and lots of launches. The problem we have is getting from the rate we have now to where we want to be so that we can benefit from those costs to enable even more flights. So that's the view within, kind of my perspective coming at this over 20 years of working at NASA, trying to be a visionary, working within the system. The positive news is we've won. The negative side of that is that people don't really understand that and appreciate it, and we've got to figure out how to put it all together to make the case, and to make the case to the public again. So that's my 2 cents.
Before we can go into mixing it up, I want to recognize someone that most of you probably don't know, but you know his work. You mentioned cell phones, so everybody take out your cell phone. Hold it up. You've all got one.
Of course.
A very old one. Well, all of these phones and a lot of other devices on this world have a chip inside of them called the 8051. So the architect of the machine language instruction set is with us today, my dear friend John Wharton. Stand up, John. Palo Alto. So John, talking about big numbers, what are we up in installed base? 10 to the 10th? That's 10 billion? Still monotonically increasing?
50 billion or so.
50 billion.
Wow.
And those chips.
The cell phone industry has, what you're saying was the case at one point.
Right.
The industry is expanding and enlarging and getting more specialized and more integrated and everything else. So I don't know what that chip is.
No, he's like, I don't know, but I think he's more like Arthur C. Clarke, who wrote this great article in JBIS 20 years after he invented the geosynchronous relay satellite. He wrote an article called How I Lost $1 Billion. But John's chip is, it's on its way to Pluto as well, right? It's been around the moon, and
it's
NASA
in
uses
the
it a
Lunar
lot.
Reconnaissance Orbiter. It's in UV spectrometers that are on the way to Pluto and Mercury. And it's the European agency that's going to be landing on a comet in a couple of years.
And I won't tell you the area code and the prefix, but if the number you dial ends in 8051, you'll get it. Okay. Now, thanks, John. John came in on a red eye from the Bay Area, so he's a little jet
The
lagged.
thing is, I'm trying to figure out how to get this cell phone.
Okay, so now in the 15 minutes
I'll
left to
facilitate
us.
the discussion. Fire away.
Okay,
Mix it up.
so I think one of the problems we have is one of imagination. Borman said in the Apollo 1 hearings that Apollo 1 happened because of a failure of imagination. I'm afraid that what our society right now has too much imagination in that we look at Challenger, we look at Columbia, and we say, oh, look how spectacular the failures can be. And we're risk averse. So how do we turn that around and say the risk is worth it? We're going to have to risk, and we're going to have to make it worth it for people. I realize that part of what you're saying is we have to make the payoff more attractive, but we're fighting this incredible inertia that says, I'm sorry, it's just too big a risk.
So to give you my brief answer to that, because I think the issue is real. My brief answer to that is that I was, in retrospect, based on your comment, kind of struck that the astronauts who have died in space shuttle missions were not accorded the same public status as 9/11 first responders who died in the towers. I mean, they were in many ways doing the same kind of job.
They're not viewed the same.
And they could be if we want them to be.
And if a musician dies tomorrow, it will be an incredible.
So let's talk about the
media
musicians,
output.
because I think this is believe it or not, I completely agree with you. The reason musicians and other kinds of artists are so much celebrity in this country is that they are actually offering something of tangible emotional value that touches people's individual lives on a daily basis, right? And there is the It's intermediated, but there's an actual human connection there about the significance of their work to the individual lives of the people who honor them. This is Sam's point more than anything else. If you do not create that connection, you don't get that kind of emotional connection, and you don't get the kind of support. Sam, speak.
I'd like to come in on this.
And then Tony.
Airplanes crash all the time. The number of people killed each year in small private plane disasters and everything else even are viewed differently. That's not viewed as a high-risk thing, whereas the space shuttle incidents were seen as a high-risk thing. And yet, if you go out on this road here and take one of these big iron things in the parking lot, you have a much greater chance of dying out there than any other place. It's a matter of conceptual types and perception. And the thing about societal perceptions is they can be changed.
Tony.
The answer is we're classifying things in the wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
The shuttle astronauts were explorers. They died explorer deaths. They were not responding to a threat. There's two different kinds of hero, and that is why you get two different kinds of emotional responses. Well, however you phrase it, you will never ever get the kind of emotional response you want to get. It's not the same thing. It doesn't count.
Let's go on to a different topic, because we'll have endless, if you want to talk about this kind of thing more, then,
beat me up.
Yeah, so we take a question here, yeah, you, and then Helen. And then, wait,
And in the back.
yeah, and then, okay, we'll do those two first. In the back first.
You know, you just said different topics, so go on.
Okay. Who's next? Over here.
So kind of going back to the material versus the transcendental aspect of it, I assume the majority of people in this room watch a lot of science fiction. Not one of those people. Look at the movie Prometheus. The whole reason he funded that trip was not to look for what they thought might be our creators, but rather to extend his lifetime, extend his time as a sentient being. That was why he was willing to invest that much money. So I agree that we need to find something that relates to people that have money to do something like that. But I also like that example because a lot of people watch a lot of science fiction, and a lot of younger people, people my generation, it's cool to be nerdy and geeky, not in a way that it's maybe wasn't 20, 30 years ago. And that resonates a lot with people of my generation. So all these new shows coming out, how the universe works, the wormhole, these kind of history and Discovery Channel shows get a lot of people really excited about this. So just saying, throwing it out there as the way that entertainment is going as a way of revolutionizing the way that people think about.
So I agree with the basic thrust of that point as well. My point about the difference between material and transcendental goods is that the transcendental goods that are able to fund really large projects have to have, I mean, I could get into it a lot deeper than I did. They have, first of all, deep commonality. So medieval Christianity in France was able to build a sharp cathedral, but there was a huge amount of common thread interest and a very deep understanding about the world that led them to take that on. You don't have that available to you in the modern world. But there are, what you're talking about, these kind of aspirations for long life. Aspirational goals are transcendental in nature. And every transcendental goal, if you can identify it as that is in this area, is correlated with the material benefit. Now my assertion is that the transcendental goods will not by themselves be sufficient, that you need the material benefit pitch. But that doesn't mean that you ignore the transcendental. You want to talk about it just as much as you talk about the material, well, maybe a little less. But in terms of public perception, the technical detail that the public will never be able to fully understand can be compacted and abstracted and becomes closer to what it looks like a transcendental pitch by the time it's done. And so the format that these things go, they're going to look more or less interchangeable in the public eye. We've got a lot of questions. Helen was next. Then you.
So,
and
gentlemen,
then
don't have too much imagination. In 1962, Arthur Clarke wrote a book called Profiles of the Future, which many of you will know. And he said that projects usually about one of two reasons: a lack of imagination or a failure of courage. And so we do have a lot of imagination, but we also have a very risk-averse culture. And there's various reasons for that which we can go into. But And that also explains, Sam was saying in his presentation earlier, we lack heroes because there's no courage. There's no reason to push forward. So you need to find a balance between the imagination and the courage, and then you can capture people.
Here, and then back
Regarding Les's point about flight rate, I've been battling this one around for like 15 years. You've got multiple problems going on, but it's mostly you need a market for the flight rate, but you need the flight rate to get the market. So the most important market that's out there seems to be robotics. So how do you sell human exploration? Because all the benefits you mentioned were primarily robotic in nature. So that's like I said, there's a lot of things going on, but that's just my observation about your flight rate.
Let me make a different point about it. One of the things that's become really clear to me just in terms of the overall financial profile is that this is a charity-like subsidy operation for the first 20 years. So one of the things to figure out is how to use, instead of trying about how to economically justify the flight rate, how you materially justify the flight rate. In other words, what kinds of material benefits are you going to gain from the flights that you take, rather than what's the immediate financial payoff of the time. If your flight rates are going up to send up asteroid retrievals, or to send up observational probes, or to send up prototype and pilot industrial plants, those are all material justifications that you can make. They don't have any immediate economic return. But to try to bring everything to the bottom line too immediately is going to easily kill this, right? As I can see is not.
Just on that very subject,
yeah.
Just to respond directly, people are incredibly resource expensive to send up. If the resources are cheaper, when the resources are cheaper, it's easier to send a human. Robotic missions are the correct choice until there is an infrastructure in place that lets humans go up for less than $1 million plus each.
Yeah, let me speak to that particular point, because it's one I did not make in my overall pitch. I've been trying to figure out what the major cost drivers of this are in terms of like what do you want to pay attention to from a strategic management point of view. And the two things seem to be two numbers: total mass of kilograms, total number of humans by head count. Right? Those two things seem to be the main cost drivers. Everything else looks like it might be just constant multiples of those two numbers. So like the first approximation, you have a linear approximation of size based on just two management parameters.
To the
We've only got about 4 minutes left, and we need to get back on schedule.
to the business plan aspect, the economic aspect,
Yeah.
the bang for the buck, if you will, from the Manhattan project came at the end of the project after
In a big bang, yeah.
all the money had been spent. And that was a government investment that was taken out of the private economy because we were at war. The Apollo project, the mission was accomplished, when man was put on the moon and then returned safely to Earth. That wasn't the end of the project, but it was after the bulk of the money was spent. And it was taken out of the private economy because we could afford to do that. Now, this is as you pointed out, is a much larger order of magnitude investment. And we can't wait till the end of the project to get the return on the investment.
That's
this
why
resonates with you, Robert. But relative to the risk aspect of it, it is also not uncommon that in development of frontiers, the initial investors do not get a return on their investment. They lose their money, and the assets are then sold to subsequent investors who do get a return.
I think
Iridium being an example.
I think that's a perfectly good point to make, and it speaks, in fact, to one of the major. We're going to have time for this question, and then one here, and then I'm going to summarize. We'll be done.
So I'd just like you to speak to incremental returns that make it worth taking money out of other.
We have to design those into the program. I think more than anything else, that's my answer to you at this stage today, is that I'm not exactly sure where those are. But given the amount of stuff that we're talking about doing, it seems absurd that nothing would spin out of it earlier than the first terawatt plant, right? I mean, this is one of the things you have to design a project like this not simply for its own technical efficiency at the end of the project, your point, also for the political reality, point of the talk, and this other one, which is it has to be at least politically and monetarily feasible otherwise. So these are all co-designed things that we have to get right.
Last question.
If people are looking for an incentive, the last time we really had the incentive to go to space was whenever we were in a Cold War, Soviet Union. I think that what really drove us at that point was competitiveness. And like it was said earlier, people like winners. So there has to be some kind of competition probably to drive people.
The competition that I think meets the reality of this most closely is the global warming climate crisis. This is not universally believed, particularly in America, but I can go on about the politics of the IPCC, but the science behind the fact of global warming is pretty unambiguous. And so, regardless of whether there's a debate on like how much to do and what to do, but in the sense that the fight against the Soviet Union, the arms race that was driven by the Cold War, was a fight for survival. Global warming is a similar kind of fight for survival against a non-human enemy. Right. And it's not really a fight exactly, and it's not really an enemy, but the point is that survival is at stake, at least in the opinions of many, many people. So this is one of the reasons why when Robert had that in his presentation with us, but I think that's vital to not dismiss, because it's going to motivate not everybody, but a large class of people.
A very quick point, going back to what you just said. One of the things you can do, and it also just his point about near-term returns, is you could design a competition to get to the one-term 2050, so there's 10 major stages in between, which could incentivize the entire.
We'll certainly have things like that as part of it.